What's the difference between a complex number and an imaginary number? Well, that all depends on who you ask. Some people might tell you that a complex and an imaginary number are the same thing, and others might tell you that they're a little bit different. And even the math world can't fully decide. So let's go ahead and take a look at one of the most popular opinions that holds in the math world. To do that, we need to recall the definitions for a complex and an imaginary number. A complex number is a number that can be written in this form, a plus bi, where a and b are both real numbers and I is the imaginary unit, the square root of -1. Now, a complex number is made up of two parts, a real part a and an imaginary part bi. Put those together and you get a complex number. Now, you may learn that an imaginary number is the exact same thing. But in most of the math world, we've sort of refined what an imaginary number is defined to be. An imaginary number is a complex number of the form bi. So just taking that imaginary part. Or you might see it written like this. The complex number a plus bi, where a, that real part, is equal to 0, just leaving us with the imaginary part bi. Now, imaginary numbers are also sometimes called pure imaginary numbers, just to help us tell the difference. So what really is the difference between a complex and an imaginary number? Well, following the definitions that we have here, an imaginary number, or a pure imaginary number, is a specific kind of complex number. So, it's like a subtype. An imaginary number is still a complex number, but it's just a special type. So, let's say we have this number, 6 plus 2i. This is a complex number. It has a real part 6 and an imaginary part 2i. So it's just labeled as a complex number, a number that can be written in this form. But what if we have this, 5i? Well, 5i can be classified as an imaginary or pure imaginary number because it can just be written in this form, bi. But take a look at this. We can rewrite 5i as 0 plus 5i. Well, that would be a number written in this form, which would classify as a complex number. So, 5i is an imaginary number and a complex number. An imaginary number is a type of complex number. And same thing goes for the reals. Take the number 8. That's a real number. But we can also rewrite this as 8 plus 0i. Here, that 0i just means that the imaginary part goes away and we're left with the real part of 8. So, 8 is a complex number, but it's also a real number. So the real numbers are a type of complex number, and the pure imaginary numbers are also a type of complex number. But why all the confusion between the two? Well, let's take a look. It turns out that when complex numbers were first introduced, they were not called complex numbers. They were called imaginary numbers. Pretty much because people didn't really believe that they could exist. And the people that did believe pretty much thought that they were useless, so they called them imaginary numbers. But we know today that complex and imaginary numbers are very useful. So, back when complex numbers were originally introduced, they were called imaginary numbers. So imaginary numbers used to be defined like this, a plus bi, the same way complex numbers are defined today. So, a number like 6 plus 2i, which today is a complex number, would be called an imaginary number back then. Here we can see the real part and the imaginary part, but this would classify as an imaginary number. Also, 5i, negative 6i, or 3 minus 2i. Those would all classify as imaginary numbers from the original definition. But today, we have refined the definition a little bit. We have classified all of those as complex numbers. And imaginary numbers, or pure imaginary numbers, still follow this same form, but that real part a is equal to 0. So they create that form just bi. So here, 6 plus 2i and 3 minus 2i would both be complex numbers. But in today's definition, they would not be imaginary or pure imaginary numbers. Numbers like 5i, negative 6i, just I, or I times the square root of 7, would all be classified as pure imaginary numbers today. They're still complex numbers, but they're just now called imaginary numbers. Now, if you have a little difficulty remembering the difference, think about the difference between a square and a rectangle. A square is a type of rectangle. It could be called a rectangle, but it's just a specific type of rectangle. Complex and imaginary numbers are the same way. An imaginary number is a type of complex number. It still classifies as a complex number. It's just a specific type.